The Titanic had 8 officers on board the night it sank. By the time the sun came up, only half of them were still alive. History remembers the ship, the iceberg, and the band that kept playing. It rarely remembers the 8 men who were actually in charge when everything went wrong, the ones giving the orders that decided who got into a lifeboat and who didn't. Some of them followed the rules perfectly and still died. Some of them broke every rule in the book and survived. By the end of this video, you'll know exactly what happened to all 8, and it's not what the movie showed you. James Moody was 24 years old, the youngest officer on the entire ship, and the one who happened to be on duty in the crow's nest relay when the call came in. Lookout Frederick Fleet spotted something dark ahead in the water and rang the warning bell 3 times. Moody was the one who picked up the phone. Fleet's exact words were "iceberg right ahead." Moody relayed the message to the bridge, where First Officer Murdoch gave the order to turn hard and reverse the engines. It didn't matter. The ship still hit. From that moment on, Moody knew exactly what was coming before almost anyone else on board did. He had the earliest possible warning, and it changed nothing about what happened next. For the next 2 hours, Moody helped load lifeboats on the starboard side, working alongside Lightoller and other officers to get women and children into boats as fast as possible. Witnesses described him staying calm, giving clear instructions, helping passengers who were frozen with panic actually move their feet toward the boats. He had chances to get into a boat himself. Officers were technically allowed to fill empty seats once passengers had priority. Moody didn't take one. He kept working the falls, kept lowering boats, kept sending other people to survive instead of himself, right up until there were no more boats left to lower. His body was never recovered. He was the first person on the entire ship to know, with total certainty, exactly how this story was going to end. And he spent every minute of that knowledge making sure other people got a different ending than the one he was about to get. If knowing first and dying anyway sounds tragic, wait until you hear about the officer who didn't even get the dignity of controlling his own story after he died. William Murdoch was the first officer on watch when Titanic hit the iceberg, which means the decision to turn the ship, the order that didn't come in time, technically happened under his command. He'd spent years working his way up through the White Star Line, and by all accounts, he was one of the most respected officers on board. Nobody knows exactly how he died. His body was never found. What we do know is that in the ship's final minutes, Murdoch was seen near collapsible lifeboat A, trying to get it launched as water rushed across the deck. After that, the accounts get messy. Some survivors claimed he shot himself. Some claimed he was swept overboard. Some claimed he stayed at his post until the very end, working to save as many people as possible. For 85 years, that uncertainty stayed relatively quiet. Then in 1997, a certain movie decided to settle the question for him. The film showed a character named Murdoch accepting a bribe, then shooting a passenger in a panic, then turning the gun on himself. It was dramatic. It was memorable. It was watched by hundreds of millions of people who now had one single image burned into their heads of who William Murdoch was. There was just one problem. His hometown hadn't forgotten him, and they were furious. Murdoch was from Dalbeattie, a small town in Scotland, and the people there had grown up knowing him as a local hero, not a murderer. The backlash was loud enough that the studio actually issued a public apology and donated a sum of money to a scholarship fund in Murdoch's name at the local school, an unusual move for a major film studio to make over a fictional character based on a real person. The apology didn't undo the damage. To this day, most people who've seen the movie assume that's exactly how Murdoch died, even though nobody has ever actually confirmed it. A man who probably died trying to save lives ended up remembered by millions as someone who took one. If Hollywood could rewrite what happened to the first officer, imagine what actually happened to the man everyone assumed went down as a hero without question. If stories like this, the ones history got wrong or just forgot, are what you're here for, subscribe now. 6 more of these officers are coming, and some of them are even stranger than this one. Edward Smith was 62 years old and about to retire. The Titanic's maiden voyage was supposed to be his last command before stepping back from the sea entirely, a farewell tour on the most famous ship in the world. He'd spent decades building a reputation as one of the most trusted captains in the White Star Line, the kind of man wealthy passengers specifically requested to sail with. That night, Smith had received at least 6 separate ice warnings from other ships in the area. Some historians argue he simply followed standard practice for the era, when captains routinely kept up speed through ice fields because that's what everyone did. Others argue he ignored clear warning signs because White Star Line wanted the Titanic to arrive early and make headlines. Either way, the ship was moving at nearly full speed when it hit the iceberg. What happened to Smith in the final hours has become almost more legend than fact. Some accounts describe him calmly directing the evacuation, giving the famous order to prioritize women and children, staying composed as the ship tilted further into the ocean. Other survivor accounts describe him shouting contradictory orders, disappearing from view for stretches of time, and in the ship's last moments, simply walking into the wheelhouse and waiting. There are stories of him swimming through the freezing water afterward, of him handing a baby to someone in a lifeboat, of him refusing a life jacket entirely. None of them have ever been confirmed. His body was never recovered, which means there was never a definitive answer to close the story, only the version that eventually became the one everyone repeats. The captain who was supposed to retire as a legend instead became one in a completely different way than he probably intended. If even the man in charge of the entire ship couldn't control how his story got told, some officers didn't even get a story people bothered to remember. Henry Wilde almost didn't sail on the Titanic at all. He wasn't originally assigned to the ship. He was pulled onto the crew at the last minute as chief officer, bumping the rest of the officers down a rank each, a decision that some of them reportedly weren't thrilled about since it cost them their expected positions. But that wasn't the hardest thing Wilde had gone through recently. A little over a year earlier, his wife had died. Then in the months that followed, both of his twin sons died as well. In the span of just over a year, Henry Wilde lost his entire immediate family. He went back to sea anyway, because it was the only life he'd ever known, and possibly because staying on land surrounded by an empty house was worse than being out on the water. On the night of the sinking, Wilde was seen helping load lifeboats, trying to keep order among panicking crowds of passengers. Some accounts place him near collapsible Lifeboat A in the final minutes, the same lifeboat associated with Murdoch's uncertain final moments. Like Murdoch, like Smith, like Moody, his body was never recovered. He died only a little more than a year after burying his wife and both of his sons on a ship he hadn't even been supposed to be working on, doing a job that had been handed to him just days before departure. There's no dramatic mystery to Wilde's story, no Hollywood villain arc, no legendary last stand, just a man who had already lost everything that mattered to him, and then lost the only thing he had left. 4 of the 8 officers were gone by the time rescue ships arrived. The other 4 had to live with everything they'd just seen for the rest of their lives. That's the last officer who didn't make it off that ship. If you want to see what happened to the 4 who did, and trust me, their stories are just as heavy, hit subscribe before we keep going. Charles Lightoller was the most senior officer to survive the Titanic, and surviving it wasn't easy. As the ship went under, he was pulled down with it, dragged beneath the surface by the suction of the sinking hull. He would have died right there if a blast of air from a ventilation shaft hadn't shot him back up to the surface at the last second. He managed to climb onto an overturned collapsible lifeboat along with around 30 other people, all of them standing on the hull of an upside-down boat in the middle of the freezing North Atlantic, shifting their weight together to keep it from rolling over completely. He spent hours like that before anyone was rescued. After the disaster, Lightoller testified extensively at both the American and British inquiries, and by most accounts, he spent much of that testimony protecting the reputation of the White Star Line rather than fully exposing what had gone wrong. He went on to serve in the Royal Navy during World War I, earning distinctions for actions against German forces. Then, in 1940, an ordinary man in his 60s, long retired from any official service, did something nobody could have scripted. The British military was trapped at Dunkirk, hundreds of thousands of soldiers stranded on the beaches of France with German forces closing in. The call went out for any civilian boat that could cross the channel and help evacuate them. Lightoller didn't wait for official orders. He personally sailed his own small private boat, the Sundowner, across the English Channel into an active war zone and helped rescue over 100 soldiers under fire. The man who survived being pulled underwater by a sinking ocean liner spent the rest of his life proving that surviving wasn't the end of what he had left to give. Not every survivor got a second act like that. Some of them spent the rest of their lives wondering if they'd made the wrong choice. Herbert Pitman was asleep in his bunk when the Titanic hit the iceberg. He got dressed, went up on deck, and was put in charge of lifeboat number 5 by William Murdoch, given basic instructions to row a safe distance away and wait. He did exactly what he was told. That was the problem. As the ship went down, the water around the wreck filled with hundreds of people screaming in the freezing dark. Pitman wanted to turn the boat around and go back to pull people out of the water. It was the obvious human thing to want to do. The other passengers in his boat refused. They were terrified that if they went back, desperate swimmers would swarm the boat, capsize it, and drown everyone on board, including themselves. Pitman gave in to the majority. The boat stayed where it was. The screaming eventually stopped. He carried that decision for the rest of his life. In later interviews and testimony, he described the sound of hundreds of people dying in the water as something that never fully left him, a decision that hadn't even really been his to make alone, and yet one he apparently never stopped feeling responsible for. Unlike Lightoller, there was no dramatic second act, no Dunkirk, no moment where the story flipped into redemption. Pitman went back to a fairly ordinary life at sea, retired eventually, and lived for decades with the memory of a choice that technically wasn't his fault, and still felt like it was. Surviving the Titanic didn't mean escaping it. For some of these men, the ship never actually stopped sinking. If one bad group decision could haunt a man for life, imagine making a single calculation under pressure that ends up sending rescue ships to the wrong part of the ocean entirely. Joseph Boxhall was 28 years old, and in the chaos of the Titanic's final hours, one very specific task fell on his shoulders. Someone needed to calculate the ship's exact position, the coordinates that would be radioed out to any nearby ships, and used to guide rescue efforts to the wreck site. Boxhall did the math. Under pressure, in the dark, on a ship that was actively sinking beneath him, he worked out a location, and that position was transmitted as Titanic's official distress coordinates. It was wrong, not by a small margin either. Modern analysis of the wreck site, found decades later in 1985, showed that the actual location of the sinking was several miles away from the coordinates Boxhall calculated that night. At the time, nobody knew that. Ships raced toward the position he'd given, believing it was accurate, and search efforts in the days that followed focused heavily on that specific patch of ocean. Some historians believe the incorrect coordinates may have cost precious time in the search for survivors and remains, sending rescuers to comb through the wrong stretch of the Atlantic while bodies and wreckage drifted somewhere else entirely. To be clear, almost nobody blames Boxhall personally. He was a 28-year-old officer doing complex celestial navigation math in the middle of a disaster under a level of pressure that would break most people's ability to do basic arithmetic, let alone maritime calculations. But the fact remains that for decades, the entire understanding of where the Titanic actually sank was built on a mistake made in the final chaotic hour of the ship's existence. He survived the sinking, testified at the inquiries, and lived a long life afterward. But somewhere out there, for over 70 years, the real Titanic sat several miles from where everyone thought it was, because of a #1 exhausted young officer wrote down under impossible conditions. 7 of the 8 officers either died that night or lived with something heavy afterward. Only one of them did something that almost nobody else on that ship was willing to do. Lowe ran away from home at 14 years old to become a sailor, refusing to follow the path his father had planned for him. By the time he was on the Titanic as 5th officer, he'd spent his entire adult life at sea, and it showed in how he handled the worst night of his career. As the ship went down, Lowe took charge of Lifeboat 14, and like most of the other officers, rowed a safe distance away from the sinking ship to avoid being pulled under by the suction. That part of the story matches everyone else's. What happened next didn't. Once the ship was gone and the initial danger had passed, Lowe made a decision none of the other surviving officers made. He organized several of the nearby lifeboats, transferred passengers between them to free up space, and then took his own boat back toward the wreck site, directly into the middle of hundreds of people freezing to death in the water. He was the only officer who did this. Rowing back into that scene meant risking exactly what the passengers in Pitman's boat had been afraid of: a desperate swarm of people fighting to climb aboard and potentially capsizing the boat. Lowe went anyway. His crew pulled as many survivors as they could out of the water, though by the time they got there, most of the people they found were already dead from the cold. They did manage to save a handful of people who were still alive, pulling them from water that was, by that point, littered with bodies. At the inquiry afterward, Lowe was blunt and unapologetic in his testimony, at one point openly criticizing how the disaster had been covered by the press. He wasn't interested in being remembered as a polished hero. He just did the one thing that seemed obvious to him and impossible to almost everyone else that night. 8 officers stood on that ship as it went down. One was the youngest, gone before he had the chance to live a full life. One became a villain in a movie he never lived to see. One became a legend nobody can fully verify. One lost everything twice before losing it all completely. One turned into an unlikely hero decades later at Dunkirk. One carried a decision that wasn't fully his for the rest of his life. One made a mistake under impossible pressure that confused history for 70 years. And one simply turned the boat around when nobody else would. That's what actually happened to all 8 of them. If you want more stories like this, the ones that got simplified, mythologized, or just quietly left out, subscribe. There's always more to it than the version everyone already knows.